This is what happens when the left just completely eats their own. I don't want to talk about this conflict anymore. Ethan will be talking to Hasan Abi about putting a pause on the Leftovers podcast. Now, if you guys don't know the Leftovers podcast, that is the podcast that he does with Hasan, who is probably the biggest leftist streamer and has definitely made some statements that come off very sympathetic towards Hamas, or at the very least not willing to fully condemn Hamas and kind of takes whatever the Palestinian narrative is on the conflict there. In a recent episode, the H3 podcast series that Ethan is most known for, the popular podcast has revealed that he did not want to talk about the Israel-Palestinian conflict anymore and that he would be broaching the issue of causing the Leftovers podcast. Okay, so let's play the clip here.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about this whole conflict anymore, really, at all, ever. And I'm frankly also thinking about putting something that I need to discuss with Hasan, but I do feel like I'm probably going to pause Leftovers for the time being.
Sheesh. So Ethan took a very reasonable position. I think what happened October 7th is terrible. I think that Hamas is terrible, and his community ate him up for it. They said that they put all kinds of bizarre anti-Semitic things up, and Ethan is Jewish. How are you going to feel about that as Jewish? And then in all of this rhetoric, Ethan was at the same time saying, guys, you know, it's sad what's happening, right? It's sad that that civilians are getting killed in Gaza. It's terrible. And there was nothing that he could say to pull back some of the hatred he was getting. And this has caused him to potentially, is sounding like, putting the Leftovers podcast on hold with Hasan.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he looks a mess on this. He looks like he's had a rough couple weeks.
Okay, Ethan.
Because you know what I mean? It's just, I don't want to talk about it anymore. That's it. And it sounds like a lot of y'all don't want me to talk about it either.
I mean, again, the radical left's fascination with the Palestinian plight and the overlap of Hamas is so bizarre. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre that people who would traditionally be your allies, like an Ethan who's a liberal, right? That they're catching strays just because they're condemning Hamas.
Fuck. Fair.
So with all that being said, I shall go suffer at home in silence with worms infecting my fucking eye sockets, and I will just sit at home and stare at the wall in silence and in dark.
How sad.
For
man.
that is what I deserve.
This is so sad. This is so sad. Listen, I'm not a fan of Ethan's politics. I'm not a fan of a lot of his takes, even though I think he's been seemingly pushing back more and more. But if it's like everybody in this oppressor-oppressed paradigm, everybody wants empathy extended to everyone except the ones they view as the oppressor, except with the West, except to Israel, except to folks who they see as having a higher leg on the dominance hierarchy. And it's such a bummer. It's such a bummer. And this is what happens when there's a void of a biblical worldview, because this is the biblical worldview. There's God, and then there's people. There's perfection, and then there's brokenness and sin. There's creator, there's creation, fallen creation. And when you look at the world like that, then you start discovering that it's not an oppressor-oppressed paradigm, that it's broken people who are hurting, and they're hurting each other, and they continue perpetuating brokenness all over the world and throughout history. And in my opinion, I don't think we should be trying to look for who's the oppressor in the dynamic. I think because that's all over history. That's all over most of the world up until recently. In my opinion, I think what we should be looking for is, when has there ever been a time in history where some of the terrible things that people have done to each other throughout history have been mitigated and have been restrained? Because that's actually the anomaly. People hurting people is common. Nation rising against nation is common. People enslaving people is common. And I'm talking about in the grand scheme of world history. This is all throughout world history. What I think we should be looking at is what parts of the world and in what times of history is that not happening? Because that's actually the exception to the rule. The ability for there to exist a queers for Palestine, even though you can't be queer in Gaza, Palestine, should tell you something, that the people who are a part of the LGTB are fleeing to Israel because that's the only place in that region where you could actually be that. That is the exception to the rule of history. That is the exception to the rule of the known world. That is the exception to the rule of women's rights. So it's so beyond me that people don't get that. Like, dude, this is America, as messed up as it is still the most peaceful place. It's still the most free place. It's the least oppressed place. It's where someone born in any ethnicity and in any socioeconomic position can actually make something of their life. When you look at it from a biblical worldview, everyone's guilty. Everyone's messed up. Everyone's sinned against each other. And I don't think Europe has more upward mobility than America, respectfully. 85% of America's millionaires are first generation rich. 65% of America's billionaires are first generation rich. I don't think it's easier to move up that ladder in Europe. I think, from my understanding, the class systems are really ingrained there. In America, there's a lot of folks that I grew up with that were poor, just like I was poor, that have broken beyond the middle class. I think that's still very unique to America. That's not, I don't think that's as prevalent in Europe as you think it is. He also mentioned that many in the audience also think he should not be talking about it. Readers should note that Ethan has donated a substantial amount of money to Hasan Abi's fundraiser. Gosh, this dude even gave money to the Palestinian medical aid that he was raising money for, which managed to raise more than $1 million with the help of viewer donations the day after. Hasan Abi also appeared in Piers Morgan's talk show. That's crazy. So Ethan was dropping money on this fundraiser he was doing for the people in Gaza. The decision to stop the Leftovers podcast has not gone well with many in the community who have asked the two online figures to resolve their differences. Here are a couple of the direction from Twitter, or X rather. So that's a bummer, man. That's a bummer. I don't think treating folks you disagree with politically is a W in this situation. We see, according to the Bible, that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. For the Christians watching this channel, I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately help me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when he answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used for my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. You can pick yours up today by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.